play inside the house. And school, slow. I was homeschooled. A lot of homeschooled kids out there, who I also meet in Los Angeles. Homeschool people find each other too. And then, well, my work is really concerned with a very special part of the Midwest too, that also exists on the East Coast, which is the Rust Belt, the post-industrial reality of a strip of land across the United States that goes from like Midwest all the way to, I think it ends in Philadelphia. So there's a huge culture around these post-industrial cities that I also feel like I really, really relate to, on top of being part of the Midwest in particular.
So when you grew up, you saw a lot of like empty industrial buildings. They spoke to you. Like, what was that emptiness about them that was beautiful?
Yeah, definitely growing up, and I'll be vulnerable here, there was like a lot of jokes that my family would make about Rockford being like the shittiest place to live in the United States. Like, quite literally on those lists of like top 10 worst cities to grow up in, Rockford would make that list like every year. And so there wasn't a lot of magic for me in living in the Midwest, pretty much all of growing up. That there wasn't like some inherent mysticism that I could identify wandering around what was, you know, a very impoverished and slow and boring place. But I did go to college and high school in Southern California, so I am half and half.
Okay.
And then I moved back. This is like a huge part of my lore. I moved back to the Midwest for circumstances, and I spent 6 years in the Midwest. So all of COVID, and then a year before COVID as well. And coming back to where I was when I grew up as a child, something about that process of returning was the most mystifying experience.
Yeah, I think when people from the West Coast meet people from the Midwest, it is a little mystifying because they're kind of like aliens. They're not normal people, right? But then you're like, wait, these are humans, and then you have great conversations with them. And I find it to be so interesting to hear very similar stories about how everybody in the Midwest grew up. And then you know, there's that connection that you all have together. You know, one of the things when I went to visit some friends out there a few times now is I noticed that it's very quiet. You know, you're here in New York and LA, it's constantly cars, talking, sounds. When you're there seems to be this like sort of emptiness, but it's a little bit of comforting. It's comforting in a way, kind of like being able to see all that.
Yeah, it is comforting, and what came to mind just now is that it kind of allows every sound to have its own moment of poetry. Because when you were describing the sound of the Midwest, or particularly where I lived, it was like the silence and the crickets and the river and the sound of a freight train just like blasting through in the middle of like that kind of very quiet hum. There's one loud noise that kind of has its own moment, and it allows you to parse through and kind of see each, or feel and hear each individual sound kind of in their own moment, which is really special because you don't really get that here.
Do you think a lot of that, I know people know you as an artist here, but you're also a filmmaker, which is also an artist. Did those like moments get you to start visualizing what to be a filmmaker would be? Because I know it's a big passion of yours.
Yeah. Funny enough, I was making films before I moved back to the Midwest. So when I moved back to the Midwest, I was like, well, it's over. I'm not making films anymore. And so I wasn't really ambitious to see the world through the lens, literally, and figuratively, through like the lens of kind of piecing it together to make something. I think probably for the first time in a really long time since I had left the Midwest and had become a woman, I was experiencing the world truly embodied. And it was allowing that filter to be taken off that really made the experience of living in this new but familiar place really stick with me and hold on to those poetic moments, and then later on be able to translate them into moments of images and now films.
So your images, sometimes still, sometimes moving, even when they're still, they feel that they have a lot of movement in them, right? And going back to what we were just talking about, and that sort of quietness of the Midwest, and then all of a sudden the noise of it all. I wonder, like, tell us a little bit about how you translate that, because sometimes I think there's this peacefulness, but also some chaos that comes along with your art in a lot of ways.
Wow, yeah, that's a great question. And I'm really excited to talk about it because the technique is something that happens when you've done it more and you start to develop a craft. But at first I was just doing whatever and then seeing what spaghetti would stick to the wall. And you're identifying some quality that I'm drawn to, which is like movement and vibrance and a sort of teeming quality to these images. And I really get that in like 2 different ways I've found. And one of those ways is for highlight situations, daytime images like this one. And then the opposite, but also achieving the same effect, is for an image like this one, which is a nighttime shot, both of which are doing the exact opposite, which is, one of them is I'm making my shutter incredibly fast, meaning I'm only opening it for like 1/1000th of a second, and so I'm capturing everything perfectly in the moment that it happened, which allows you to see the the fly perfectly right next to the grass, and it's like full bent motion right next to her hair that might be like sweeping across her face, and then making it very, very deep and having all of those layers kind of landing to a single moment, so you're really feeling it. And then this one is the opposite of that, which is I'm keeping the shutter open for a very, very long period of time. And that is philosophically more exciting because you're capturing time in a single frame. You're capturing, maybe this is like 6 seconds. So everything that happens in that 6 seconds, every shadow movement, all of that water flowing through a literal, I actually think this is a lake, but if I were shooting a river, it would be like flowing through the river. You would see all of that and it would be condensed down to a single image. So that teaming quality can be achieved in multiple ways, but it is something that like I am always trying to capture in whatever technique I'm using.
And I think it's amazing because a lot of times people look at your art, like I first time, and I've seen your art for a few years now, but sometimes you look at it and you're like, is that real? And I'm assuming used to ask that question, now I'm realizing that you probably want people to ask that question, right? Is this reality? Is this fantasy? Is this AI? Is this really photography? Like I think there's this sort of mystical sort of like, it looks almost too real to be real some ways, but I think you're going for something there, right?
Sure. No, I'm just kidding. I would say that the style that I've developed to date has really just been out of sheer impulse. And maybe Mid-American Fever Dream is a little bit different because it has surreal qualities, but it also doesn't go quite as like surreal.
That's a whole story.
Yeah. But there's part of me, and this is just, I'm going off the dome, there's part of me that wants people to not be so sucked into fantasy that they are not able to experience the moment of enchantment in their everyday lives in the same way. And that's something that I've been thinking a lot about in this last probably 6 months, and definitely with filmmaking, is like, yeah, I know that like all of these are like, they're not photoshopped and they don't have, this is a taxidermy, it's a real deer. But like, it doesn't matter whether or not people think that or not. They could think it's AI generated and it won't mean anything to them. But if you can create, it won't mean anything to them whether or not it's AI generated or whether or not it's something that I put, you know, a lot of time and effort and whatever into. But there's going to be like a different affect that might pull people in more, that will have a more relatable sensibility that I'm interested in exploring in the future.
So for you, I think it's clearly that you're interested in fantasy, but I want to pull up more on that thread of like, that our everyday mundane lives are fantastical. And I think that that's what you capture in a lot of ways, these certain like specific moments, and it's like, well, that could be Narnia, but it's also just my backyard. Mm-hmm. And if we don't focus on those moments, then we kind of miss out. We don't realize that we're living these amazing lives and these mundane moments that are really special.
Definitely, and that goes back to the Midwest, I think, which is a place that really allows you to dig in your feet into the dirt and say, what am I experiencing right now? It's quite existential, but it could also be very enchanting and mystical to slow down and really ground yourself in what is it that I'm experiencing psychologically by looking at this tree, or how amazing is it that the moon transforms every single month. Right. How amazing is it that the sky blushes pink every single night, and like how does that look different upon my lover's face? Like, you can get really poetic with it, I do, to a fault. But there's so much magic in poetry in just being present and embodied and kind of allowing your perception to create illusions of magic in everyday life. Do
you write poetry first before you go take the photos?
I have a very consistent journaling practice that I've been just doing since I was very, very, very little. And it's pretty much the basis of my creative process, is just being able to like throw out. I don't journal like where I'm talking about my day or anything. I'm kind of just like stream of consciousness, throwing some honestly wild shit down onto the page, and like won't look at it for a very long time. And then when the time feels right, I'll kind of return to that field of thought and see what catches. And that's usually how I'll begin the writing process.
So you go from the written word to these beautiful images. That's a big process. I saw some behind the scenes. You have like a ton of people who are helping you, and it seems like, you know, like these, like, you know, it looks like it's just one person, but there's a lot of people supporting you in this. And I'm just curious how that process works. You know, is it local people you're friends with? Do you fly out with them? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah, it's different for every photo, to be honest, because some photos, like this one, I was just like, I have an idea, I know how to do it, I know where to get the deer, like, meet me here.
Wait, did you know the deer personally, or?
I know this girl
okay.
Who's a vegan taxidermist.
Wait, let me understand this.
This is 100% true.
Taxidermist.
Yes.
So she's a taxidermist, but she's vegan.
Yeah.
So does she okay, maybe you should explain, because I have no idea how you could be a vegan taxidermist.
She is a person who will go out into the wilderness or to the side of the road and find like deceased creatures and then breathe life back into them through the craft of taxidermy. But she doesn't eat meat, and she never kills her own, or like the animals that she taxidermies.
Okay. Only humans.
Only the humans.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I knew her from, I don't know, just mutual friends, and I had actually shot with her before I even had my own camera. I was borrowing a friend's camera, and I was like, let me come over and take pictures of your taxidermy and you. Those pictures are very, very cute and cool, and I recently looked at them. But they did not do the taxidermy or like the opportunity to shoot with such a beautifully crafted, lifelike creature justice. So I returned to her and asked her to borrow the fawn, and then I brought it with me to this beautiful park of golden.
So this is not a live.
This is not a live deer. This is a dead.
I thought maybe you serenaded it and it followed you in the woods and you got it there. Okay.
I would.
How do you know, because the process is so, and you have a lot of people there and it's so complicated, how do you know when the right shot is there? I'm assuming you take a lot of different photos and you go through them and then there's that one, right? What's that moment like, or how do you get there?
Usually, honestly, I won't know until the edit.
Okay.
And it's kind of a shot in the dark because there's a lot that I can't see on a very small screen. And I could get like a bigger monitor or whatever, but when you're shooting in like the middle of a forest, it's just sometimes not going to happen most of the time. And like the crew that I used, you asked this question earlier and I'll clarify. The crew that I've used in the Midwest has always just been mostly my friends. I did hire a gaffer who is now a friend, but like he was so clutch. But really it's just like my pals, you know? So it's like, we're not doing anything crazy. We're not creating a call sheet and stuff, but like my friends are gonna show up and like make some amazing shit with me. But sometimes I'll know when a moment comes in the shooting process. I really do think of shooting a lot of these scenes as like setting up rituals for either myself, if I'm doing a self-portrait, or the actors who are in the scene. Setting up spaces and rituals for them to be truly immersed in the space and in their character and in the moment, so that their job is literally, they almost can't not do it. That makes sense. Like they just have to go there. And my job when I'm shooting is to craft the scene and their headspace to where we get there. And when we do get there, and I know we have gotten there, that is like an amazing feeling.
It clicks.
It clicks. And then I'll know that the rest of the shooting that we do, we either got it before